I told my sister that Marcus couldn't keep his hands off me, that his appetite was wearing me down. Everyone took my side immediately. They don't know I manufactured the whole crisis to cover up what I'd done. I realize now I wasn't complaining about his desire. I was burying my own guilt under a mountain of false accusations. The truth is, I shattered our relationship because I couldn't face myself in the mirror after what happened with Jake. By the time I understood what I'd destroyed, Marcus had already moved out, changed his number, and told our entire circle that I'd been lying. I'm telling you this because I need someone to understand why I did what I did, and because the real story, the one I've never admitted to anyone, starts 3 months before I ever opened my mouth about his sex drive. I'd been drowning at work since the Henderson project landed on my desk. 70-hour weeks, impossible deadlines, a boss who measured my worth in caffeine-fueled all-nighters. Marcus would wait up, rubbing my shoulders, pouring wine, trying to carve out space for us in the tiny cracks of my schedule. At first, his touch felt like salvation, proof I was more than a spreadsheet with anxiety. But somewhere between March and May, my skin started feeling like it belonged to someone else. I'd flinch when his fingers traced my spine. I'd invent headaches, early meetings, mysterious stomach bugs. The hints were there if anyone had been paying attention. How I'd started volunteering for weekend shifts. How I'd deleted the shared calendar app. How I'd stopped sleeping naked because I couldn't bear the accidental brush of skin in the night. I told myself I was just exhausted, that this was what burnout felt like, that Marcus would understand if I could just get through the next quarter. The decision came on a Tuesday. He'd made dinner, lit candles, put on that playlist from our first anniversary. When he reached for my hand across the table, I saw it as another demand on my already depleted reserves. Instead of saying I'm drowning and I need help, I chose different words. I chose the words that would become a weapon. I told myself I was being kind by not burdening him with the truth, that his constant need for physical connection had become suffocating, and I was doing us both a favor by creating boundaries. I didn't know it then, but I was already planning my exit strategy from the relationship. Not a real exit, just enough distance to breathe, to stop feeling like his hands were asking for pieces of me I didn't have left to give. The Henderson project had introduced me to Jake, who understood the pressure because he was under it too. Our coffee runs turned into lunch meetings, turned into late-night texts about clients who didn't understand the difference between a revision and a complete overhaul. Marcus noticed the phone face down on the table, the quick screen locks when he entered the room. He asked once if everything was okay at work. I said yes, of course, just busy, you know how it is. But I knew what he was really asking. I just didn't have an answer that wouldn't make me the villain. The conversation happened that Thursday. I chose my moment carefully, after he'd had a few drinks with friends when his defenses would be lower. I said we needed to talk about expectations. I said his sex drive was too high for our current life pace. I said I felt overwhelmed. What I didn't say was that I'd already begun emotional negotiations with someone else, that I'd already decided Marcus's touch was the problem rather than my own inability to stay present in our relationship. Marcus's face went pale, then flushed. He started apologizing immediately, listing times he'd initiated when I seemed tired, promising to be more considerate. I should have stopped him. I should have said, no, this is about me, not you. Instead, I let him carry the weight of my betrayal. That was the first decision. The second came the next morning when Sarah called for our weekly coffee catch-up. She asked how things were. I said fine, just dealing with Marcus's high sex drive. The words tasted like ash, but I said them anyway, needing someone to validate my manufactured victimhood. Sarah made sympathetic noises, said boundaries were healthy. By noon, I'd told 2 more friends the same narrative. By evening, I'd posted a vague meme about emotional labor that everyone interpreted as being about Marcus. The small consequence came that night. Marcus tried to kiss me before bed, then stopped himself, said goodnight, and slept facing the wall. I felt a pang of something, but told myself this was what I wanted: space, breathing room, a partner who respected my needs. What I didn't realize, what I couldn't see through my own fog of self-righteousness, was that Marcus had already found the text messages from Jake that I'd forgotten to delete from my laptop. The rationalization came easily. I told myself that if Marcus had been more attentive to my emotional state, I wouldn't have needed to seek understanding from Jake. I told myself that physical desire without emotional connection was just another burden. I told myself I was finally standing up for myself after years of being the accommodating girlfriend. The third questionable decision happened the following week when Marcus suggested couples therapy. I refused, saying I needed individual space, not joint sessions. I said his willingness to consider therapy proved how out of balance his needs were. The truth was, I couldn't sit in a room with a professional who might see through my performance. The first small consequence I couldn't ignore arrived when Marcus stopped asking about my day. He stopped leaving me notes in my lunch bag. He stopped texting me midday to see how the Henderson project was going. I told myself this was the boundary I'd requested, but a voice in my head whispered that I'd broken something I couldn't repair. Sarah texted our group chat that she was so proud of me for setting boundaries with Marcus, and the flood of heart emojis from our friends cemented my public identity as the victim of his excessive needs. I leaned into the narrative. When coworkers asked why Marcus wasn't at our usual Friday happy hour, I said he was giving me space. When my mother called and mentioned Marcus seemed quiet at the last family dinner, I said we'd been working through some intimacy issues, careful to frame it as his issue, not ours. The dramatic irony was excruciating. Marcus knew about Jake, had known for weeks, but was waiting to see if I'd come clean. He was giving me chances I didn't even recognize. I interpreted his silence as acceptance of my terms, when in reality it was him watching me destroy us in real time, gathering evidence of my betrayal. He slept on the couch now. He made his own coffee in the morning. He'd stopped asking what I wanted to watch on Netflix, stopped assuming we'd share the Sunday crossword. I told Sarah these were positive changes, proof that my conversation had landed. She agreed, said sometimes men need firm communication. Meanwhile, Marcus was building an exit strategy I couldn't see coming. The deeper culpability started 6 weeks before I'd ever mentioned his sex drive. The Henderson Project had sent me to Seattle for a conference, and Jake had been on the same flight. We'd shared a car to the hotel, then drinks at the hotel bar, then one too many confessions about our struggling relationships. Jake's girlfriend didn't understand his career ambitions. My boyfriend didn't understand my need for space. The symmetry felt meaningful instead of manufactured. The truth bomb, when I finally admitted it to myself, was that I'd already crossed the line before I ever complained about Marcus. I'd already let Jake kiss me in the hotel elevator. I'd already texted him the next morning. Last night was a mistake, but I can't stop thinking about it. The relationship damage became visible when Marcus stopped wearing his ring. I noticed it on a Thursday, wanted to ask, but couldn't form the words without admitting I'd been checking his hands. When I finally confronted him, he said, I needed it resized. The lie was so gentle, so clearly designed to protect me from the truth, that I felt physically ill. I deleted the entire text thread with Jake the day after Marcus asked about my trip to Seattle, telling myself I was being proactive about boundaries, but really I was destroying evidence. My defensiveness reached new heights when Sarah mentioned she'd seen Marcus at the gym, looking really down. I immediately launched into a monologue about how his mood was exactly why I'd needed to have the sex drive conversation, how his emotional state had become my responsibility to manage. Sarah nodded, but I saw something shift in her expression, a flicker of doubt that hadn't been there before. The justification I clung to was that Marcus's desire had always been intense, that I'd been accommodating him for years, that my Seattle mistake was a symptom of my own needs being ignored, not a cause of our problems. The truth I couldn't face was that I'd never actually told Marcus about the work pressure in a way that invited solutions. I'd used it as a wall to hide behind, then blamed him for not scaling it. The doorbell rang that evening and I opened it expecting Thai food, but it was Marcus's mother, tears in her eyes, saying we need to talk about what's happening to my son. The confrontation with his mother shattered whatever delusions I had left. She didn't raise her voice. She sat at my kitchen table and said, Marcus thinks you've fallen out of love with him. He thinks he's the problem. But I know my son, and I know when someone is being pushed away for reasons they're not being told. I started to recite my script about his sex drive, but she held up her hand. I don't need the official story, I need the truth. I deflected, said this was between Marcus and me. She left a card for a therapist and said, whatever you're protecting, it's costing you both everything. The relationship damage was now multi-generational. I'd involved his mother in my lies by omission. I'd let her worry about her son's mental health based on a narrative I knew was false. The tease of something worse came when she mentioned Marcus had been sleeping at his brother's house for 3 nights. I hadn't even known he was gone. I'd been so wrapped in my performance of the exhausted, touched-out partner that I hadn't noticed my partner had already left. That night, I found the engagement ring receipt in Marcus's nightstand drawer, dated 3 days before I told him his sex drive was too high, meaning he'd been planning to propose when I chose to tear him down instead. The consequences began cascading. First, Marcus moved his things into the guest room, a physical boundary that made our dysfunction visible to anyone who visited. Then he stopped answering my sister's texts, cutting off the supply of information I'd been funneling through her to maintain my victim status. The social dimension exploded when I posted a photo of my new self-care Sunday routine, face masks, herbal tea, a book about boundaries, and Marcus's best friend commented, "Maybe try caring about someone other than yourself." I deleted the comment, but the screenshot had already made its way to 3 group chats. My desperate attempt to fix things came when I booked us a weekend at the cabin we'd visited early in our relationship. I sent him the confirmation email with a note, "Let's reconnect." He replied, "I think we need to talk about separation instead." The justifications became more elaborate. I told Sarah that Marcus's reaction to my boundary setting was proof he'd never respected my autonomy. I told my mother that his withdrawal was emotional manipulation. I told myself that if he'd just listened, none of this would have happened. Marcus's brother called me directly, something he'd never done in 6 years, and said, "He knows about Jake. He has the screenshots. Stop lying to yourself that you're the victim here." The hole got deeper. Instead of confessing, I called Jake and told him we needed to coordinate our stories, that Marcus was becoming unstable and might reach out. Jake panicked, said his girlfriend had already found our texts. The social dimension expanded to include my workplace. Jake's girlfriend worked in HR, and suddenly my performance review was flagged for conduct concerns. My worst decision yet, but not the ultimate one, came when I told my boss that Marcus had been harassing me at work, showing up unannounced, making scenes. I thought this would protect me, give me a paper trail. Instead, security footage showed Marcus had only come once, to drop off my forgotten laptop, and had left without incident. The consequences escalated when I was put on probation for making false claims. My justification at the time was that I was protecting my career, that Marcus's behavior was erratic even if that specific instance was benign. The truth was, I was creating a record to discredit him before he could expose me. The email from HR came at 4:47 p.m., effective immediately. Your access to company messaging systems is suspended pending investigation into misuse of company property for personal communications. The fallout consumed my days. Marcus changed the Netflix password, something so small but so definitive. He canceled our joint gym membership. He removed me from the shared grocery delivery app. Each act was a thread being snipped from the fabric of our shared life. I tried to fight back by telling Sarah he'd frozen our joint credit card, leaving me stranded. She offered to lend me money, but I saw the doubt in her eyes when I couldn't produce the card to show it was declined. The breadcrumb about the ultimate secret came when I was packing up his remaining things from the guest room and found a journal I didn't know he kept. Inside, entries from the past 6 months detailed his confusion, his hurt, his suspicion about Jake. The final entry, dated the day before he left, read, "I found the proof. I know everything. Tomorrow I tell her I know and I leave." I realized with cold horror that he'd been planning his exit while I was still performing my victim monologue. He'd known longer than I'd admitted to myself. Hidden in the back of the journal, I found a printed email from a therapist, dated 2 weeks before our conversation about his sex drive, showing Marcus had already sought help for feeling disconnected from my partner, meaning he'd been trying to save us while I was planning to blame him. The unraveling began with insomnia. 3 days without sleep, my body vibrating with the knowledge that Marcus knew everything and had chosen to leave rather than confront me. I started calling him at 2 a.m., hanging up when he answered, a coward's version of connection. I showed up at his brother's house at dawn, mascara streaked, claiming I was worried about Marcus's mental health. His brother's wife told me to leave or they'd call the police. The self-sabotage became performance art. I posted a photo of Marcus's favorite coffee mug, shattered on the floor, with a caption about accidents happen when you're grieving. I tagged his sister, ensuring she'd see it. Public-private split widened into a chasm. Publicly, I curated a narrative of a woman rebuilding after a difficult relationship. Privately, I was leaving voicemails for Marcus begging him to tell me what I'd done wrong. When Sarah tried to intervene, saying, "You need to stop, this is getting scary," I accused her of taking his side, of never having been a real friend. I pushed away the only person still reaching out. Marcus sent a single text after 3 weeks of silence, "I have the ring. I'm ready to talk." I felt hope surge, then died when the next message read, "About how you'll repay me for it since I can't return it." The emotional whiplash triggered a new level of desperation. I showed up at his office during lunch hour, cornering him by the elevators. He was calm, terrifyingly calm. He said, "The only thing I want to hear from you is the truth about Jake. Everything else is noise." I deflected, asked about the ring, about us, about whether he could ever forgive me. He walked away. The support system crumbling accelerated when my mother called, saying Marcus's mother had told her everything, the real everything, not my version. My mother said, "I raised you better than this. I don't know who you are right now." Someone hurt by my deception, my younger brother, who'd looked up to Marcus as a brother figure, texted me, "You didn't just lie to him. You made me complicit. I defended you." I had invited him to vent about Marcus's needs months ago, creating an ally who now felt used and dirty. The near confession came at 3 a.m. when I drafted an email to Marcus titled, "The Truth." I wrote 6 paragraphs about Jake, about my fear, about my sabotage. I deleted it and wrote instead, "Can we please just try counseling?" He replied, "It's too late for that and you know why." Sarah posted an Instagram story of her and Marcus having coffee, captioned, "Sometimes the truth sets everyone free," and I realized my best friend had chosen my ex over me. The social validation gap destroyed what was left of my grip on reality. I drove to Sarah's apartment, pounded on the door. She opened it holding Marcus's dog, the dog we'd adopted together. She said, "He's traveling for work, I'm watching Leo, and you need to leave before I call the cops." I screamed that she'd betrayed me, that friends don't take sides. She closed the door. I sat in my car for 4 hours, watching her post photos of a peaceful evening with Leo, a glass of wine, a book, my life repossessed. The direct question came from my boss, who called me in after HR wrapped their investigation. "Did you have an inappropriate relationship with a colleague, and then attempt to cover it up by making false claims about your personal life?" I said no, but they had the screenshots I'd deleted from my work phone, which had synced to the cloud. The setup for the biggest revelation came when Marcus's lawyer sent a certified letter. Not about the ring, about defamation. He was suing me for telling his mother he had a sex addiction, a claim I'd made to protect my narrative. The letter listed every person I'd told his mother, his sister, our friends, my own family. He had documentation. He had proof. He had timestamps. The final page of the legal documents included a screenshot of a text I'd sent to Jake on the day. I told Marcus his sex drive was too high. "Marcus wants to talk tonight. I'm going to tell him I need space. Meet me after," proving I'd orchestrated the entire confrontation to create time for my affair. The truth bomb detonated my remaining defenses. I couldn't claim I'd been driven to it by Marcus's behavior when I'd clearly planned it as a strategic move. The unraveling became literal. I stopped eating, stopped sleeping, stopped answering work calls. My public facade collapsed when I posted a rambling confession on Facebook, then deleted it after 12 minutes, but not before 47 people saw it. The emotional peak came when Marcus's sister called me, not to yell but to say, "He cried for 3 days straight. Not because you cheated, because you made him believe he was broken." The near confession I pulled back from was answering Marcus's direct email. "Why did you tell me it was my sex drive?" I typed, "Because I couldn't admit I'd already slept with Jake and I needed you to be the problem instead of me." I deleted it, sent, "I don't know, I was confused." He didn't reply. The dramatic irony was that while I was still trying to control the narrative, Marcus had already told everyone the truth, his family, our friends, even my mother. There was no narrative left to control. While I was drafting another apology email, Marcus was posting photos from a weekend trip with a woman I'd never seen, looking happier than he'd looked in our last year together. Meaning he'd moved on while I was still performing my victim monologue to an empty theater. The dramatic irony built to excruciating levels. I was still sleeping in his old t-shirts, still using his Netflix password he'd forgotten to revoke, still telling myself we could fix this. He was introducing his new girlfriend to our old couple friends. They were accepting her. They were happy for him. The setup for the biggest revelation came when I finally accessed our old shared photo cloud, looking for evidence of better times to send him. Instead, I found a folder labeled Evidence, timestamped from 3 weeks before I'd ever mentioned his sex drive. It contained screenshots of my texts with Jake, photos of hotel receipts from Seattle, even a recording. Marcus had accidentally activated his phone's audio recorder during one of my late-night calls with Jake. He'd known everything for months. He'd documented it all. The confrontation about his sex drive hadn't been a surprise to him. It had been a test, one I'd failed by choosing to lie instead of confess. The engagement ring receipt I'd found wasn't from before my betrayal. It was from after he'd discovered it, a final gesture of hope he'd purchased before deciding to leave. The ring wasn't for me, not really. It was his last-ditch effort to remind himself why we were worth saving, and when I chose to attack him instead of confessing, he returned it the next day and started planning his exit. The worst truth, the one that reframed everything, came out in our final conversation. Not the one where I begged. The one where he finally talked. He told me he'd known about Jake since the week after Seattle. He'd seen the text when I'd handed him my phone to look at a recipe while my hands were covered in flour. He'd waited, hoping I'd come clean. He'd bought the ring, thinking maybe if he proposed, reminded me of our commitment, I'd end the affair. But I'd come home from work that Tuesday, the Henderson project finally done, and instead of confessing, I'd chosen to have the talk about his sex drive. He said, "You looked me in the eye and made me feel ashamed for loving you. While you were still sleeping with someone else." The specific hidden action I'd been hiding wasn't just the affair, it was the deliberate, calculated way I'd used his trust as a weapon. I'd initiated the sex drive conversation not just to create distance, but to preemptively discredit him. I'd told his mother about his excessive needs the day after I slept with Jake for the second time, creating a witness who would view any future complaints from him as confirmation of his problem, not mine. Marcus revealed he'd been recording our conversation that night, not for legal reasons, but because his therapist had suggested he document interactions that felt manipulative, and he'd wanted to understand if he was really as excessive as I claimed. The truth bomb exploded any remaining self-deception. There was audio evidence of me saying his desire was exhausting and constant, when in reality we'd been intimate twice in the month before I complained. The fallout was immediate and absolute. Marcus's mother sent me a copy of the recording with a note, "I think you should hear what you sound like." I sounded cruel, calculated, like a stranger. My defensiveness peaked when I tried to claim the recording was illegal, that he'd violated my privacy. His lawyer's letter clarified that in our state, only one party needed to consent to recording. My justifications reached their most desperate. I told his mother that his recording me proved he was obsessive, that normal people don't document their partners. She replied, "Normal partners don't cheat, and then publicly shame the person they betrayed." The truth changed everything, because it revealed the timeline. Marcus had documentation proving I'd started the affair before I'd ever complained about his sex drive, making my claim that his behavior drove me to it a complete fabrication. The engagement ring receipt was dated after he discovered the affair, meaning he'd considered forgiving me even after I betrayed him. I destroyed a relationship with someone who had been willing to look past my worst action. Marcus's final email included a screenshot of a text I'd sent to Jake saying, "Marcus is so clueless. He has no idea," sent on the same day I'd told Marcus I loved him and would work on our communication issues. The emotional whiplash was severe. I'd been telling Marcus I wanted to work on us while texting Jake that Marcus was clueless. The damning detail was that I'd sent that text while Marcus was in the same room, watching the movie I'd picked, thinking we were having a good night. The consequences of the revelation hit in waves. First, my mother stopped taking my calls. Then, Sarah returned everything I'd ever given her, left it in a box on my doorstep with a note, "I can't be friends with someone who lies to themselves this completely." The final hidden element, the last secret I didn't know Marcus knew, came when his lawyer included a copy of a receipt in the lawsuit documents. A receipt for a morning-after pill, purchased in Seattle with my credit card. He'd found it in my wallet months ago, said nothing, waiting to see if I'd ever tell the truth about everything. The lawsuit wasn't about money. It was about forcing me to acknowledge every layer of deception. He wasn't suing me for damages. He was suing me for a public retraction of the sex addiction claim I'd made to his family. He wanted me to admit, in writing, that I'd fabricated the entire narrative. The final page of the lawsuit demanded not money, but that I publish a written apology to his family, admitting I'd lied about his character, a consequence that would make my betrayal public and permanent. The consequence escalation was devastating. I could handle paying damages. I couldn't handle publicly admitting I destroyed his reputation with lies. The final shoe dropped when I realized the lawsuit was being filed in the county where his mother lived, meaning it would be public record in the community where she'd already told people about her son's sex addiction based on my claims. He was giving me a choice: tell the truth publicly, or face a court case that would air every screenshot, every recording, every receipt. He was giving me a choice: tell the truth publicly, or face a court case that would air every screenshot, every recording, every receipt. The last hidden element was revealed in his lawyer's final paragraph. Marcus had been offered a job in another state, had accepted it, and was moving in 2 weeks. The lawsuit wasn't about revenge. It was about closure. He wanted to leave with a clean slate, with documented proof that he'd been the victim, not the problem. He wasn't trying to hurt me. He was trying to protect himself from the narrative I'd continue to spin in his absence. The engagement ring, which I'd found the receipt for, had been returned to the store, and the funds donated to a domestic violence hotline. His final statement on who the real victim had been. My mother called to say she'd been invited to Marcus's going-away party, hosted by his family, and that she'd be attending because they've been more honest with me than my own daughter. The aftermath splintered across every area of my life. Professionally, I was demoted at work for the false harassment claims, moved to a remote position where I wouldn't interact with Jake or his girlfriend. Socially, I was uninvited from 3 weddings where Marcus was a guest, the couples choosing him. My relationship with my mother became a series of tense text messages where she defended Marcus's family as good people who didn't deserve this. Internally, I told myself Marcus had been controlling, that his recording me was a violation, that suing me was excessive. Externally, everyone saw a woman who cheated, lied, and tried to destroy her partner's reputation to cover it up. The social media element became a nightmare I couldn't control. Marcus never posted about the situation directly, but his sister did, subtle things, like sharing articles about the dangers of false accusations and healing from betrayal. Our mutual friends started unfollowing me. I posted a photo of myself at a museum, looking contemplative, and someone commented, "Maybe reflect on why you need to lie to feel important." I deleted the post, but the shame remained. While I was drafting a long public apology post, Marcus posted a simple photo of his new apartment key with the caption, "Fresh starts are possible," and it got 200 likes from people who knew exactly what he was starting over from. The dramatic irony was excruciating. My attempt to control the narrative was happening, while Marcus was simply living his truth and receiving support for it. The moment of genuine self-awareness broke through when I was sorting old photos and found one from our first Christmas. Marcus looked at me with such uncomplicated love, such belief in our future, that I finally understood what I destroyed. It wasn't just a relationship. It was his ability to trust, his sense of safety, his belief that love was worth the risk. My defensive cracks widened into canyons. I admitted to Sarah, who had agreed to one final coffee, that I hadn't just lied to Marcus, I'd lied to myself about why. I'd been bored, scared of commitment, intoxicated by Jake's attention, and too much of a coward to handle any of it honestly. The current state was that I was living in a studio apartment I could barely afford, had been removed from my friend group, and had developed a reputation at work as someone who couldn't be trusted. Marcus was thriving. I'd seen photos of him with his new girlfriend at a work function, looking relaxed and happy. The lawsuit was still pending, but his lawyer had indicated Marcus would drop it if I published the apology. I hadn't yet. I was still clinging to the idea that I could find a way out that didn't involve complete public humiliation. I told Sarah that Marcus's lawsuit felt like punishment, not justice, and she looked at me with such pity and said, "He's not punishing you. He's protecting himself from a person who still can't stop making it about herself." The defensive justification felt true to me, even as Sarah's words exposed it as delusional. The current state was that I was functionally alone. My mother checked in once a week with brief, polite texts that felt like duty calls. My brother had blocked me on social media after I accused him of choosing Marcus over family. Work was a solitary hell of remote tasks and video calls where no one engaged in small talk. I'd started seeing a therapist, but even there I struggled to be fully honest, still minimizing, still rationalizing. The social media element had become a form of self-harm. I checked Marcus's profiles daily, torturing myself with images of his new life. He'd never looked happier. His girlfriend seemed kind, the kind of person who wouldn't manufacture a crisis to cover an affair. The current state of our legal situation was that I had 10 days left to respond to the lawsuit. Marcus's lawyer had made it clear: public apology or public trial. No middle ground. I'd spent the previous night writing the apology, deleting it, rewriting it, trying to find words that sounded remorseful without completely destroying what was left of my dignity. The problem was, dignity was a currency I no longer possessed. My therapist played back a recording of our first session where I'd said, Marcus's needs were just too much, and asked me to listen to my own voice, forcing me to hear the performance I'd been giving even to myself. The reason I'm telling this story now, today, specifically, is that Marcus's engagement announcement popped up on my feed this morning. Not to the new girlfriend. To someone else, someone from his new city. He's moved on completely, built a new life, and the lawsuit is still pending only because I've been too cowardly to finalize the apology. Seeing his happiness, his complete separation from the chaos I created, forced me to understand that the story I've been telling myself, that I was a victim of circumstance, that Marcus's lawsuit is excessive, that I deserve some measure of privacy, is just another performance. The truth is, I said his sex drive was too high because it was the one thing I knew would hurt him, would make him question himself, would give me cover for my affair. I learned that I have a pattern of using other people's vulnerabilities as weapons when I'm feeling trapped. I learned that I confuse honesty with cruelty, that I think being real means being harsh, that I don't know how to be close to someone without either merging into them or destroying them. The moral ambiguity is that I still love Marcus, or at least the idea of who we could have been. I still believe in some twisted part of myself that if he'd been less perfect, less trusting, less willing to look past my faults, I might not have felt the need to create chaos just to feel something. I know that's not fair. I know that's not right, but it's what I feel. So here I am, having told you everything, waiting for your judgment. I said his sex drive was too high. Now he won't touch me, and I'm begging for attention. But the attention I want isn't from him anymore. It's from anyone who will tell me that I'm not irredeemable. The question is, do you believe me? Or do you see what Marcus saw: someone who manufactures crises because the truth is too boring to bear?